Well, welcome. Here we are for part two. Last time we reviewed the qualities of the materials, and now we're going to put them to work. So I thought we'd take several different approaches. My personal approach is to be very fluid, and I've got a whole set of my own characters, and uh, but I also know that there are people that like drawing from their observational point of view. And so I brought my one of my pals with me, and I chose something that I felt would be simple enough for beginners to tackle as far as drawing. And the thing is, as I mentioned before, it's not like anybody needs to do anything other than your style. And you can, as a beginner, you can start developing your style. And the best thing to do is not be overly influenced by anybody telling you the way that you're supposed to do something. So it's going to be coming out of your head. You can look at it in terms of, do I want to do something that's hyper realistic, or do I want to have a little more fun with it and do something that's kind of loose and fluid? So what I'll do is show you a variety of techniques and a way of approaching things, especially with the tools that you have at hand with the Triad box, the wet mediums, as well as anything else that Faber-Castell makes. It's just such a high quality product that it will make things easier for you as you're trying to learn how to do things. If you have bad materials, then a lot of times what's going to happen is that you don't know if you're doing something wrong or if it's just because you have a bad material. So I always encourage people to try to buy the best that they can afford. All right, so enough of that. We'll get right to it. I think that there's a reference photo on site that you can use as a guide so you can see what I'm drawing from my point of view. What I'm going to do with my version of it, I'm going to flip him a little bit so I'm not looking straight on at him. Um, and what I'm going to do is just use him for inspiration for the first kind of technique, just to show you how you could work very loosely. And then the second project that we'll do will be a little more about how to draw an object, how to break the different parts down in ways that might help you in terms of doing observational drawing. So in your kit, this is the Faber-Castell Goldfaber Aqua Dual Marker. So it has one point that you can get with a brush, and that is probably my favorite. And then you have a fixed point that has a more regular width. So I like to combine those two technologies, the one that is a little more fluid, a little more energetic, and then something that you can kind of modify it with. All right, so since the clown, I'm going to kind of just imagine animating him a little bit. So what I'm doing is just very quickly making some just quick little gestures. And then instead of kind of making him static, I'm going to give him a couple of arms as well. So you can see as I'm drawing, it goes from thin to thick. It kind of depends on how I'm moving. Like if I go, as an example, I can go off this way and then come down, really bear down on the point and get it to be thick, and then twirl it a little bit and taper it off. So this is consistent with a very kind of organic feeling. So if you're doing something with a figure, maybe around the shoulders, you would have a line like that. But it kind of helps give you the idea that that shape is rounded as opposed to a line like this that is very consistent all the way around. And so that could be part of something that's flat. It could be an outline, whereas this is a little bit more convincing as something that is describing a volume rather than a flat shape. So we'll get back to Mr. Clown here. And so, you could draw just say, okay, we're doing clowns today, so you can draw your own version of it, maybe kind of using something as a reference point. As I said, pretty soon we'll get to doing something that's a little bit more based on kind of like a still life approach. Let's get real skinny little legs and then enormous feet. And so obviously I'm not really too worried about proper proportions. I'm just kind of having a little bit of fun. All right, so now this marker is water soluble. And what I'm going to do next is I've got my water pen. The thing that I'll remind you of, because I always get thrown by these things. Normally, if I want to tighten something, I go clockwise if it has some kind of threading. Um, in this case, it's opposite to that. So instead of tightening by going clockwise, it takes the head off of the barrel. And so you fill it up with water. And then again, instead of going clockwise to tighten it, you go counterclockwise in this case to get that nice and tight. Well, the first time I tried using one of these brushes, I thought something was wrong with it because I couldn't unloosen it. And all I was doing is tightening it and tightening it. All right, so we'll do kind of like a couple different sections here. So if I want to, the idea is that if you squeeze this a little bit, you'll get water to come out and keep your brush fluid. And so I'm going to maybe kind of do part of his clown suit here. And so if I put that wet brush up against that black line, you can see the way that I have kind of a really nice gray tone that evolves as a result. And what I try to do is get a nice pool of liquid and then I just move it around. And that's the advantage of the watercolor. We're not trying to make things opaque like you might with oil or acrylic paint. You want to keep it nice and light and fluid, and you don't want to concentrate it so much that it becomes opaque. All right, so now I have enough residual black that I can kind of very lightly go over some of these things to get some more tone out of it. So what I'm doing is just kind of thinking about, well, where do I want to make some little shadows? What can I do to kind of give it some form? And this is what I would recommend, get your black marker out, get your brush out, and just start playing with it. And whether or not yours looks like a clown, whether it looks like just some shapes, if you get used to just kind of finding out how the materials work, then eventually you'll really get it so that you're making the images and the kind of art that you would like to. And it's just a matter of practice and doing it over and over again, experimenting to see what kind of effects you can get. I mean, I'm going to handle these differently than you are eventually, but at least to begin with, I can kind of let you see how I handle it, and it may be something that could be helpful to getting you started. All right, so I'm just kind of generally thinking about the light coming in from, frontal position, and then you figure out anything that is closest to the light, you'll keep the white paper, and then everything else will have a tone to it. And the other thing too, you could use this value to separate. So here's the head. In order to pop off the body a little bit more, if I have this kind of darker tone, and then I have something that's lighter, it separates it and gets that to kind of pop off. Okay, so at this point then, now the paper to review, this is a specific watercolor paper, and it's a really good beginning paper to work with. It's a Canson, let's see, watercolor paper. The XL indicates that it's been recycled, and there are really high grade watercolor papers, but you want to use something that's specifically for watercolor because it has a lot of sizing in it. And as I had mentioned in step one, the function of sizing of the paper is to give you a chance to work with your washes, pushing them around. And then let's say down here, I decide, oh, that got too dark. When it's still wet because of the sizing, if I press my paper towel or my rag in, I can almost remove every bit of that pigment. And that's because the sizing on the cotton fibers of this paper, which really want to suck up the moisture and the pigment, um, it allows you some time in order to do that so that instead of it being just a untreated fiber that sucks it up right away, it has a coating of the sizing in it, which is, essentially, uh, something is like a starch that they put into the paper that kind of gives it that little bit. And so that it keeps things workable. So if you want to lighten something up, then while it's still wet, you can pick it up with a scrap piece of paper, with a chamois cloth, with, Q-tips, whatever. Okay, so now that that is done, now I have to remember that to a certain extent, the black is, if it gets touched with water, it's gonna bleed a little bit. But that's kind of some of the energy and the fun because I look at it and I have these real bold black lines that I have used to create the clown. And then I have these really nice washes. And if you look at them, the reticulation or the way that the pigment has kind of spread is very characteristic of water media, particularly watercolor. And so I really like the quality of that texture and the way that the pigment has flowed throughout that pool of water. So looking at it just gives it the look of a watercolor. And again, everything is transparent. You don't have anything that's built up really opaque like an acrylic oil painting or gouache or poster paint or something like that. Now at this point, I could choose to either use my pencils or the tube watercolor. I thought we'd start with a tube watercolor. And I have this nice plastic mixing dish. And so that it makes it kind of handy because then you can put separate colors, then you have a couple areas that you can mix them. And this is handy because if I want to repeat something, even if this is dry, as soon as I put water on it, because it is watercolor, then I can rework it. So instead of it being on something else that I would lose that, I can still kind of be a little more sparing with my materials that I haven't lost that because just wetness from the brush will reactivate that. So then what I'm going to do is I come here and maybe get it to be a little bit redder with this kind of magenta color. And these just come, from the tubes of the watercolor that I included in the kit. And so I'm going to kind of stick more kind of to where the paper is. I'll let them kind of overlap onto the gray. But if I get too busy with trying to put it down there, the moisture from the red that I'm putting there is going to reactivate the black, and they'll get kind of maybe a color that isn't quite as bright and intense as I'd like. I can kind of tap it out. I put a little more water into the brush itself. So if I want it to mix with the stuff underneath, I can just kind of pat it like that. All right, so we got that. Let's give him, and I'm kind of working with the notion of him having blue eyes, little red bits and stuff. So we're not totally out of what's actually there. And, all right, so let's give him some blue dots, polka dots. And these I'm just blotting on. And again, I like keeping it fairly transparent, at least to begin with, because the paper, this allows the white of the paper to come through, and it actually brightens the color a bit if you keep it transparent, because the white of the paper is very, very influential in what the final version is going to look like. And I can come back and maybe kind of reclaim some of these areas. Hey, let's give him some, let's give him a deluxe set. We'll give some more polka dots here. Okay. Now let's give him, again, this is kind of a little bit more characteristic with the way I work. I kind of make things up as I go. So I may have something as a reference in my head, but then I really like to depart from reality. I guess that's one way of putting it. Okay, I'm going to pick a little of this yellow and I'm going to mix it with my green because I want more kind of a spring green rather than like a shamrock green. All right. And so then let's just give them some striped trousers here. And I also like, instead of being real fussy with these lines, I'm trying to be comfortable enough that I can make my lines with just one fluid brushstroke. And since I'm not trying to make this look real, it's more kind of an illustration. That I don't have to worry so much about it not being absolutely perfect. Although, I do try to get what needs to be done there. All right, so I used a little bit of the magenta and the yellow, and I added a little bit of green and blue to kind of make this brown. And that's the other thing that I recommend doing is just especially if you have one of these dishes, you could also do this on wax paper. You could do it on disposable paint palettes or whatever. But what again is nice about having one of these little trays here is that I can mix these colors up and I can let them use them. I don't have to use them all at one time. Okay, so we're going to give him some ordinary brown shoes. Now I notice I'm picking up a little bit of the black, so I'm going to clean my brush, come back here in just one motion. I don't mind if it mixes with the gray because that'll help give it some volume, but I want to try to keep it from getting too polluted from my strong black line. Okay, well, it's just a matter of maybe, again, I'm going to take this magenta color and squirt a little of that out. And then come back here, get the yellow, maybe closet yellow, pick up a little of that. And I want like a kind of a brighter red, so I can make a red that way. Okay, so I'm going to just make one single stroke, clean the brush. See, this way, even if the black gets wet, you're not really moving it with the brush, so it's not going to be quite as fluid like that. And then maybe we can put that little pom-pom on the top. You can put some yellow there. Okay, at this point, it might be where I want it. I could work into it a little bit more. I'm going to take a little bit of blue and mix it a little bit with magenta to make kind of a slight purple color. And then if I want to kind of put some shadow on some of these polka dots, that might make them a little more interesting. And then for the green stripes, I can take a little bit of blue. Or actually, I could just use the straight green right out of the tube. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put darker green there and here. So I'm thinking that if these pants kind of tuck around his waist, then it's going to kind of fold and balloon out. And so in that case, if I change the value of the stripes in this area, it's going to, and then come back and do the same thing here, it's going to give the illusion of volume on the curved parts of his pants here. Okay, so that's just kind of now it's starting to look a little bit more volumetric and a little less flat. And so I kind of like playing those things off of each other. Okay, I want to come up here. Now I want to get maybe a little stronger sense of blue here. I'll come back and maybe put a little extra in his eyes. Come back to get a little extra of my brighter red. And can I go over that nose again? And then maybe some. And then almost everything I do, I like having shadows. I'll take this kind of brighter purple I've just made, and then I'm going to leave the texture. I like the kind of dry brushing it a little bit so I get a bit of the texture of the paper to come through. So I think that would be nice. Okay, so that's a real quick way to kind of play with the materials. It's much more open-ended and you can have a lot of fun with it. And this is definitely one way of treating the materials. Okay. So if anybody has any question, again, to feel free to ask away. I can paint and draw and talk at the same time. So, all right, now I'm going to flip him around so I can see him a little better. And I'm going to orient my page to be vertical because this is vertical shape. Now I'm going to take, I normally would maybe use a yellow pencil on this, but I don't think it would show up so well on the camera. So I'm going to use an orange. But in assessing what I'm looking at, and like I said, instead of me looking at him straight on, I'm going to flip him over a little bit because there is a seam that comes here. And what's kind of interesting to me is that when they painted this thing, all the extra color stops right on that seam. And if you look at the back of it, it's just the yellow. So I find that a little bit amusing and we'll probably take advantage of that concept. All right, so I've positioned him so I can look at. The other thing I recommend doing is maybe getting a little portable light, a little desk light or something like that. And if you shine it on your objects, then you'll get a little more dramatic shadows and highlights, and you'll be able to get the cues to make things a little bit more volumetric. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, this is a very symmetrical object. So as I turn it around, if I don't really look at the face or the details like that, for the most part, as I turn around, it's the same shape all the way around. So on a vertical axis, it is symmetrical. So what I'm going to do is very lightly just kind of come up. And you could do this with a drawing pencil. You just want to kind of keep it nice and light. All right. So now I'm going to kind of analyze what this is about. So he's got a hat, so you've got the hat, and just very lightly, I'm going to kind of sketch in that little pom-pom on the top. And then I'm looking at about how far to go down. And a lot of old cartoons I remember growing up, they always make a big joke about the artist looking over their thumb or something like that. And it actually works. So if I want to, I shut one eye and I kind of put the point of my pencil at the top of his hat, and then I can bring my finger down to where the bottom is. And then if I lower it, I can see how much bigger his head is compared to a hat. So if I take this dimension from here and here, which represents from here to here, then I need obviously to make it bigger from here to here because his head is a little bit longer than the hat. All right, so I've got that, and I'm going to say it's about this much bigger. Okay, maybe I'm going to cut back on that a little bit just to give us a little more room here. You can erase as you go along. Okay, and then there's a little collar that goes around his neck. Then I got 5 segments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the first one is a little bit bigger than the others. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I have another one, and then I've got the bottom of it. So this is kind of a gauge just to let me know where all the different parts are. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of very lightly put in an ellipse. So if you're looking at something, for instance, this tray, it's round. And so if I look at it straight on, it's a circle. But as it tilts, it's still a circle physically, but visually, it's becoming an ellipse. And the more that I rotate it, the ellipse becomes longer compared to the width of it. So, here it's a perfect circle. Now I'm starting to flip it around, and the distance from here and here is getting smaller, but the distance from here to there is staying the same. And that's what kind of creates the notion of it being an ellipse. And then finally, when I get it like that, it just looks like a straight line. So the same thing happens when you're drawing circles, depending on where your line of vision is. You'll either see it as a circle, or if you start seeing it a little bit more at an angle, it's more like kind of a rounded ellipse. And then as you tilt it around, it flattens out. And then finally, it's just a straight line. So when I look at this, I can imagine if I had a cross section of the top of the hat, and I mean the head and the bottom part of the hat, what would that be? Was it more like a round circle? So if I'm really have it in front of me, I'm looking down at it, it's going to be much more circular. But when I look at it at a distance, if I would slice through there and look at what the cross section is, it's going to be more of kind of like an ellipse, about like this. So I can kind of sketch that in. Well, once I have my ellipse established there, then I can just go right up into here, and that automatically draws that part of the hat. I don't have to worry about, for sure. It's just like, here's the starting point, here's the end point. So this is automatic. However, what happens is that there's a step down as you go along. So this is like kind of the front, and then it comes around, and then the next one is a little bit smaller. So I can, draw a couple of these things in here. And then the last one's like that. So this one's like that. This one sticks out a little bit. This one sticks out. This one sticks out. And then this is the bigger one that goes all the way around. So I can do the same thing here. So I just follow them around. All right, so there's my hat. I might make this just a little bit small. There, we'll just add a little something to it. Okay, so there's my hat. Now, the next thing you do, all right, what about this head? So it comes from here to here. It's almost like a potato. It isn't a totally round thing. So up about here, I'm going to draw another ellipse, and so it's going to be a little more roundish. And then there's also one down here, about like that. And then when it comes down to his neck, it's going to be just a little bit smaller. All right. So if I look at those three cross-section ellipses, that means that I'm coming down and I go to that end of the ellipse, end of the ellipse, and around like that, and then like that, and like that. So it's more like kind of a barrel. Well, as I'm looking at it, I think that it needs to swell out just a little bit more. So I can ad lib here a little bit. Now, the eyeballs. So if the eyeballs are kind of close to the bottom part of the hat, again, I can use an ellipse that goes from here to there. And then my center is a little bit off. So if I were to draw the center line here, it'd come down here and it'd come around here and like that. Now I'm not drawing straight lines. I'm going with what I feel is the curve. So if I kind of would rub my hand on that, I get a sense of the curve. So I want to draw in a similar direction. So now I would put one, if this is a center line, then, one eye is on the side of the center, and I come over here And then this is on that side of it. And they're more of ellipses. If I were looking straight on, they would be circle. And if I come over here, then it's going to be more like kind of a vertical ellipse. Now the nose is around here. So here's the center point. Here's the height of the nose. So let's put the nose right there. And then I look at where the mouth is. It kind of goes from there to there. And so I will put this nice happy smile on him. So because he's at an angle from the center line over here, I'm going to see more of the length of this. And as it turns away, I see less of it. And then there's this little kind of little round cheeks. And there's one here that sticks off the surface a little bit. I'll come across here. And then that helps me locate that one there. Okay, next thing. Here's his collar. And I've said it's like that. There's the bottom part of it, and it comes around. Okay, and then follow it across, and then this comes down here like this. And there's his collar. Now, there's a little bit of scalloping here, so it kind of comes down. This one kind of comes up, and that one kind of comes up. And then again, let me draw the seam line now. This is the seam. You know, in the manufacturing of this, it's you know, part of the mold, and you get a little seam, and then the seam comes down like that. And wherever the seam is, that's where the color comes around, and it'll stop right here. All right, now let's do the body. It comes down. So its widest part is down about here. And I look to see how far. All right, here's the edge of the head, and then here's the body. So I want to get this feeling that this part of his body sticks out. Okay, let's see about how far. All right, so where my finger is, that's the difference between his head and the fattest part of his body there. So down about here, which is about 2/3 the way down, I'll look at that. And if I want to, again, I can say, all right, well, you know, how wide is that, you know, compared to that? So I'm going to say it's about like this. And since I am looking more down at it, I'm looking almost straight at him this way, but then this is going to be, as I look down at it, then this is going to be more of a circle, less of an ellipse. So I'm going to make this curve a little rounder like a circle than I did for these, because I'm kind of looking down at it, and that'll help kind of promote the illusion. And then if I decide that that's where the fastest part is, then again, it's just a matter of extrapolating to that. So here's, you know, where it kind of starts, and it comes around here and it curves. Then it tapers into the body, I mean, in away from the body. So it comes down about like that. So that's the overall shape. And then down here, there's just a little piece of red. There's a little red thing that it rocks on. All right, now I'm coming down here. Here's the center. Here's the center again. And this time, you know, the center is coming down this way and into there. So if I look at the row of buttons, it's going to fall here. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. And again, this one is a little bit bigger than the others, so I'll draw that one in first. And then this one is a little smaller, so we're going to come across like this, and then across like this, and across like this. And then I can decide how wide this is, and then I will just follow that down to the bottom one here, and like that. So what I'm doing is mapping out the main shapes. So then there's a button here, and it's going to be more, again, like an ellipse. And there's another one here, one here, another one here. Okay, now here's the seam line, and it comes like this, and then like this, and like that. Okay, so these are tubes, and they're rounded. So what I'm going to do is come back here, and I'm going to go around, and I'm going to go around. So they have more like kind of the Michelin Man look, you know, these kind of tubes, and I'll do the same thing here. Like a grenade. Okay, so there's our facsimile. It looks like, well, I don't have it quite symmetrical. I need to add a little volume. I kind of skimped a little bit on these parts on the back. Okay, now when I have that traced out, again, this is all water soluble. So whatever way that I'm going to be applying the watercolor, it's going to enact this. So essentially, if I go to paint some yellow on top of something that has a lot of orange to it, it's going to turn that orange, that yellow paint into more of an orange color. I want to avoid that. So I'm going to take my eraser, and so with very light pressure, I'm going to go over that. And especially the guidelines. I don't really need the guidelines anymore. But I really want to reduce the pigment from the pencil so it doesn't interfere with the coloring that they put down on top of it. So you erase it to the point, and I'm not using a lot of pressure. I would rather kind of go over it multiple times because I don't want to start tearing the paper or change the surface so that when I add some kind of watercolor wash to it, it's going to be obviously not right. Okay, that looks better. So it's light enough that even with the water the color that I put on top of it, it shouldn't bleed so much that it's going to turn into a completely different color. Okay, so I'm going to add a little more yellow to my palette here. And again, when I go to paint, I'm not going to use it without diluting it. So if I take it off and then just put it down, that's very opaque. Okay, and that definitely is a painted yellow space, but we're using watercolor, and the advantage of the watercolor is you could keep it transparent and it gives it an inner glow that you don't get necessarily when you're going with opaque things. So I'm going to come back, and also, if you put a color down that's a little bit lighter than you want, you can always add another thin layer to beef it up a little bit if you need to intensify the color. All right, so most of it's yellow, so that's no big deal. We just go through, and so what I'm doing, I'm not using a lot of pressure, but I am allowing a little bit of water to come out of the pen, of the brush, because I want to keep things fluid. And a lot of times I think of it more in terms of, okay, I'm putting down a pool of colored water and I want to move it around to get some washes and get a feeling for, kind of the flow. Okay. The top of it, all up here is yellow. And then as I mentioned, along the seam side, the other side there is just yellow. Now, we don't have to be a slave to the way this thing looks. I mean, I could make it as if everything is painted um, consistently. But in this case, I thought, well, let's try to kind of use what's there as our guide. And then there are a couple little places where there's some chip paint. And the same thing up here. This one, the paint, that ring, the paint is almost gone on everything. This one has little spots, and this one is mainly solid, but when it comes to the seam, and then along the edge of this one, there's quite a bit of paint missing, and a little bit here, and a little bit there. All right, now let's move down to the body. Nope, that's a little too thick. And again, like, I can just take my rag or a paper towel and take the excess off. But I want to do it, before it dries, obviously. Okay, so now I'm going to just use broad strokes for this part of the wash. I still have enough of that orange in there that I can see it as a reference, but it's not going to really interfere with this being a nice bright yellow. Now, once I get most of the colors blocked in, we're going to then kind of have a little divergent activity where I've already done another one of these things. And so this one I'm working on now, since it's going to be wet, I don't want to use pencils on it until it's totally dry. And, in order to do that, then we would be overstepping our allotted time. So I did another one that's very similar to this that is good and dry. So then we can talk about how you can do a multimedia project using the pencils as well as the paint. Okay, if there are any areas I think, oh, I just got that way too dark there, you just pick it up. The sizing of the paper enables you to have a little bit of work time there to change things. Okay, so let's go to the red. And that's in the hat. So I'm looking at it and I'm going to just do one thin thing of red all the way across up to where that seam line is. And then the same thing with this one and this one. And this one. And that one. So for right now, that's good enough. We'll go back and start. And I also recommend that you start off with thinner layers of watercolor, and then as needed, go back and start intensifying areas of color and shadow. You'd add something to make them a little darker. Okay, so that one has a little bit of paint missing as well. Get the collar. And as I imagine, okay, as I apply the pigment, it's like this is a rounded shape. So I want to kind of use brush strokes that are reminiscent of the shape, because any bit of a pattern that develops with the pigment, the way that you're applying it will help reinforce that that's round and not necessarily flat. Okay, and there's some red down here at the bottom as well. Add just a little more, make it just slightly darker because it's really kind of underneath. There we go. All right, so we got that. And we have some blue to do. I think I can pick up the blue I already have mixed here or have put in my tray. Okay, so here are the eyes. And they're light, but that's, what I want in the beginning. And then I'll start to build up and some of the colors will become deeper. Let's get that smile in there. There you go. Okay, so there we are. There's our beginning. Now I can look at it, and again, I can get a sense. I don't have a real specific spotlight. It's more kind of the lighting that we have that is more like fluorescent lighting. So I don't have any real dramatic changes, but I can tell where the light is hitting the most and what would be in shadow. So here in the front, it's kind of away from the light. So these are going to be a little darker. So I'm going to come in with a more intense red. Okay, so that's going to help. All of a sudden, just the fact that I have this lighter color on either side, I have kind of, I really didn't cover in between them the tiers very much. And so that acts as a highlight. So just doing something that simple and it gets it to pop out a little bit. And that's it too, is like the contrast between something that's very pale and something that is really richly colored. If it's associated with the same shape, then you intuitively see that as a distribution of highlights and something that is in deeper shadow. All right, so if I look at the cheek here, close to the head is darker. Down here, it's since it's kind of a bump, the bottom. In fact, I'm going to really kind of emphasize that a little bit more. I'm going to put just a little bit of a kind of purple in there. Could be a little darker. And same way with the nose. I want to get something that's a little more vibrant and intense. So I'm going to add a little bit of that magenta. And so that's kind of right in there. And I'm not, I don't have like a quadruple zero brush that is like two hairs in a brush to get detail. I don't want to get quite that picky with it, by just letting things flow with single brush strokes, then it is more effectively reading as a watercolor. All right, so here along the bottom part in through here, it's much darker as it comes here, and there's a little flux of paint there. And then this comes up here a little bit like that, and then goes down, and then comes up, goes back up again. And then down in here, that's a little bit darker. Okay. And then, let's see, over on this side, the top that's coming around like that is a little darker. So it's more like that. Again, if you don't like it, then blot it. Okay, this should be dry enough that I could kind of come back with a little purple, make that even darker to make it look a little bit more shadow. I want to speed things up a little bit because we're going to run out of time.
It's your 10-minute warning.
Yes. Okay, so now I'm going to take just a touch of this red and add it to the yellow. So I get more kind of a brownish and just a touch of green as well. Okay, and very quickly, I'll just try to kind of finish up here. So this part is way away from the light, so it's going to get a little bit of a shadow. And then on the other side of the seam light, I got of the seam, and then this comes across a little bit, this comes across, so then I can get a shadow underneath there. That rounded a little bit. Okay, around the nose comes out a little bit. Okay, here this flattens out and becomes a little darker there. Okay, I'll do the same thing here where it's a little darker as it comes around. And there's a dark shadow kind of where those little segments are. Now the yellow buttons have a shadow on the side. This, as it comes down this way, also has a shadow. I want to make these rounded. Okay, like that. Okay, so I mean, I think you see the way that we're going here. You know, it would be just a matter of kind of, okay, that's good. And try to keep your brush flowing. Don't stutter too much. Having kind of these fluid brush marks, I think has a better look. Okay, and this is pretty dark as it gets underneath here because it's a little bit smaller. So the idea is that you just kind of analyze where the lights and the darks are. And then I always like, okay, I have it on green paper. And the reason I kind of start off with that, I like having backgrounds. I don't want it to just be sitting around on a just white blank paper. So very quickly I'll see I can come down, and then this will help define the outside edge without having to outline it. Again, I'll try to speed it up because I want to get to that other drawing very quickly. We can talk about the watercolor pencils. Now, at some point, when you become a little more proficient and you want to experiment some more, you can have a water brush, but you might, for these larger kind of areas in the background, you probably would just want to get a bigger brush altogether. Because then instead of doing these little strokes, you could just go ahead and flow it. And there are other techniques too. I mean, there are ways that you can wet the paper. And then if you go over that with the pigmented stuff, it'll start to spread out. So that's an effect that you could look at and experiment with. Okay, but okay, and then what I'm going to do is take a darker green, and there's kind of like an elliptical shadow down here. That'll help ground it, and that also will kind of help with the whole thing. And then I'll just kind of encourage it to blend out a little bit. So instead of it being a real sharp, and then I could actually even come back with my rag here, maybe just kind of pick up a little bit on the edges so that fades out a little bit. And then the last thing that I want to do is just kind of get those eyes to be a little more intense because they're still a little washed out. But, you know, it definitely would, if I had, let's say, another hour, I could do a lot more fine tuning. But everything that I've done up to now is kind of the way to get started, and the way to fine tune it is just build it up a little bit more in areas. Okay, so there we go. We got our cloud. All right, let me move this out of the way. And then in the moments left to us, here's one that I did a little bit earlier. And so now, the reason I did it earlier, I want this to be totally dry. I still might use a little bit of watercolor, but I've got my pencils here. And so now, if I want to, I could do some extra stuff. And what I want to do is, let's think about putting a pattern on him instead of it just being a plain yellow, just a few little spots of color. So as I mentioned, these are kind of the shape of this is that this is a rounded shape. So let's say I want to do like a checkerboard type. If I go around like that and I come up like that, then go around, 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 down. And I'm not using a lot of pressure. I don't want to dig into the paper and disturb the surface of it. But I do, these are soft enough that this is enough pressure to get enough pigment. Now, as it comes around, as I'm looking straight at it, this could be less of a curve. It's just the way that you look at it straight on, it's going to look like a straight line, but as it goes one side or the other, now see what I'm going to do is bring this to curve a little bit around this way. So this curves this way, a little straighter, almost straight, and now it's starting to curve a little bit like this. Okay, and then up and through here, it's going to curve a little more pronounced like that. And down here. And then we can come across this way, this way. There. I can also use these. I can use this darker blue. And if I want to start to maybe shade in a little bit, I'm just hardly using any pressure at all. But I can start adding a little bit of shading to make those buttons stand out a little bit more. And I can either leave it as pencil. I mean, it looks just fine as a gradient being created with a pencil, or I can add water to it. As I look at the side here, then this could be a little bit darker. There's a shadow that kind of comes around here, and then a little bit darker, and then a shadow that comes across this way. Again, the shadow. So what I'm doing now is starting to come up with some darker areas that'll help separate, so everything won't kind of just blend together. And then I can put a little bit of light blue at the bottom there when it comes into this area that is actually kind of indented. Yeah, if I put my finger over it, it moving around. And then, you could come up in through here, get a little bit of, let me just finish this up very quickly. So it's just a way to get a little more volume out of it. If you're interested in making things look a little more solid or a little more realistic. Okay, same way with the top here. The parts that are vertical, I could make those a little bit darker by putting a light cover of blue in it. Get a little more volume out of this. Okay, so I think you can see what I'm doing here. Maybe just a little shadow at the top of his neck. Make this a little darker here and still a little shadow, but okay, and then you have the option about whether or not you want to enact that. So for the stripes, and come in here like this and make them a little thicker and they'll blend a little bit. And then once those lines dry, then I could come back and maybe put a second set, let's say of red. And I can do that very quickly, I think, and it'll still be reasonably on time here. So, if I wanted to, I could kind of come by and we'll pretend everything's dry and I can come by. The green lines have spread out a little bit because I added water, and maybe for these magenta reddish lines, I could just leave that a little crisper as kind of a nice contrast. So I can continue doing all that. I can put a background in. I could put my shadow with the pencils. And then that way I've got the texture of the watercolor, which I mean, essentially removes the texture of the paper. And then if I come back with my watercolor pencil, over that, okay, there's the shadow there, kind of feather it out a little bit. And then if I want the shadow to be a little bit more pronounced exactly at the bottom, if I come back with my brush, and then I could leave the pencil here, or I could even take my finger and kind of gently massage it. So then I have a softer feeling for that shadow. Let that dry. Maybe I could come back and paint over it. I mean, you know, it's up to you to kind of mix and match and decide. But the one thing I always caution, make sure the paper is dry before you start working on it with a pencil, or else you're going to scrub up the surface and you're not going to be happy with that. Okay, well, does anybody have any questions? Any final? I know that we're a couple minutes after 2, so.
Oh, I think we're all good.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining. As I hope you could tell, this is a lot of fun. And even if you're just beginning, just work through it with a happy heart and enthusiasm. The more you do, the better you get. And part of it is just trying to decide for yourself, what do you want to say? What is your artistic version for what you want to do? Clearly, if you have followed any of my demos before, there is an element of humor and good fun, and I just really enjoy doing this. So, and I especially like showing other people, and so thank you so much for joining us today.